CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. I welcome the author, Charles Pellegrino, to respond to news from the disaster site in Florida and what we've learned from many years of tragedies, of collapses, 2,000 years of collapses, because Charlie's work includes not only what happened in the tragedy of 9/11, but also the tragedy of Vesuvius and the loss of Pompeii and Herculaneum 2,000 years ago. There is physics here. I read from the Dan Barry column in the New York Times. For anyone who recalls the fresh days following the World Trade Center catastrophe 20 years ago this September, the reports and images from Surfside, Miami, are almost too familiar, no matter that the Champlain building was roughly 1/10 the height of the 110-story Twin Towers. The two events are bound by the human and technical rhythms of disaster. Charlie, a very good evening to you. Thank you for this. Your book, The Ghost of Vesuvius, is my entry point to this because you have studied collapses. You also worked at the 9/11 site following to talk about what happened when the building fell down, what was the likelihood of recovering anyone in the enormous pile. You lost a family member at the building. What did you learn then, Charlie, and what now explains what we know of this collapse of this building in Miami? Good evening to you.
Hi. Well, it was very similar to the way that, because we have video from surveillance cameras in Florida, and the collapse occurred from the bottom down, and it was almost, if you imagine the North Tower and the South Tower, that was somewhat the same type of thing. It was about, if you imagine 10 stories of the North Tower just starting to pancake down, you had that outsplash effect, which in Florida was terrible. What happened when the surge cloud that went sideways after the whole center of the structure collapsed, there was one section still standing, and it had had enough weakening from the outsplash and surge cloud effect against vertical supports that it then began to lean and finally collapsed from the bottom up. And it's the pancaking effect of the stories, of the different floors or decks of the building, that is really, there's almost no chance of surviving if you're within that pancaking effect of a building that's 10, 12 stories or more.
You worked at the 9/11 site to recover the sequence of events that led to the collapse of the two towers. What did we learn from that, Charlie, about buildings, about collapses, about catastrophes? Because we can presume this will not be the end of it.
Well, pretty much what we've just been talking about the pancaking effect. And one thing we did learn from that is people who were caught between the floors, it was very, very quick. The chances of survival were near zero, but it was over in between 1/200th and 1/400th of a second, and the nerves don't even begin to transmit pain in that amount of time. So that's one of the things I know. What happened to my cousin was very fast. What happened to a friend of the family, one of the firefighters, we know it was very, very fast and very, very painless.
And the pancaking effect, that happens in buildings that are, any building can happen, or is it particular to the way that the towers were built and this condominium was built on the seaside? I'm trying to understand.
If there's enough mass, so 10, 12, 100 stories or more, once an entire floor falls only about 20 inches, it has a momentum that is just a momentum and a mass that just cannot be stopped. It's almost like we had people who were being crushed by soda machines years ago when they weren't bracketed to the walls, and people thought they could get a can of soda to drop down by rocking the machine back and forth. And if you rocked it back toward you just about 6 inches too far, the strongest man on earth could not have stopped that thing from the momentum that was going forward, and people were actually getting crushed under soda machines, doing something kind of dumb. But this is just, there are certain things with each tragedy of this sort that just grab you. I think a lot about the recovery workers, what they're going through now, and always a photograph that just grabs you. And for me, and probably for a lot of other people, it's that torn away section where you see into a room and you see this bunk bed, the two children could have been in at that time, and if they were there, it's just, I'm just waiting and hoping to hear that they were all right, because they were essentially in a shock cocoon where all the forces went around them and didn't touch them, but there's a ledge right outside that bed. If they got up in a panic and ran for their parents or for a hallway, they had a 12-story fall.
What is a shock cocoon?
I'm just hoping, Charlie, and waiting to hear that whoever might have been in those bunk beds, that they're all right.
What is a shock cocoon, Charlie? That's a technical term you've taught me.
Yeah, that's where you can be right near complete destruction, and the forces either don't move, the forces of destruction and all that mess, it either doesn't move toward you or it just bypasses you. And you see that in the room where the bunk see that there's a chair near the bed still sitting there. You often see that where rooms are sliced in half, and there can be a table with the items that were still on the table. The cups and plates are still there in place. And yet right next to it, everything is granulated and turned to dust.
That's a phenomenon you've explicated at Hiroshima, yes? And the atomic bomb
sites.
Yes,
it's a phenomenon that you see with all high-energy events, be it tornadoes, atomic detonations, volcanic eruptions, and volcanic surge clouds, and the collapses of buildings.
And the shock cocoon allows some people to survive, or just the objects in the shock cocoon are not crushed?
No, people. We had that with a stairwell, that all the forces went around the stairwell in Stairwell B in the North Tower on 9/11. And at the South Tower, there was even a space where we're talking about forces of the collapse of the Twin Towers being about the force of a .38 caliber bullet over every square inch, and yet those forces went around one man at a corner of the South Tower, a Port Authority police officer named Robert Vargas. He survived in a shock cocoon where everything around him was destroyed, and he got a few scrapes and bumps, where all the forces, one piece of metal can be sticking up in just the right direction, providing just enough resistance for the forces to go around it, almost like you're sitting behind the point of a jet that's going through supersonic air, and you're safe in that one little spot. That's a shock cocoon.
Charles Pellegrino, the author of The Ghosts of Vesuvius, which is a story of catastrophe and the physics of catastrophe. In the meantime, the tragedy in Florida, the tragedy in Miami, and the recovery continues, reminding all of us of the 9/11